All right, welcome back to the fifth installment of the Intro to Typography videos for Walla Walla University's Intro to Typography class. We're designing a typeface. If you haven't seen the document setup, the H, the D, or the S, I recommend you go watch those first as they walk you up in difficulty and methods to where we're at right now. That said, the next section is actually considerably less difficult than the S that we just designed. We're actually going to design some punctuation, and punctuation is pretty easy. You can actually turn through some punctuation pretty quickly because it tends to be pretty geometric and need very few stylistic decisions inflicted upon it. So we'll go ahead and just lock this S layer and hide it away for now. And we're going to design a few punctuation marks. I'm going to do a period, a colon, a comma, and a quote. And those are all pretty related, so it's actually not going to be too difficult. There are other punctuation marks you'll need to do, but I trust that you'll figure out how to get around those. So in this case, rather than using the pen tool, I'm going to go ahead and use the shape tool, because a period is, pretty simple. It's just a circle or a diamond or rectangle, depending on your font styling. So I'll just use the ellipse tool here, give myself a new layer. And here we go. So actually, I'm going to back up 1 second here and just say it's probably a good idea to give yourself a reference for the weight of your type. So I know that the weight of my type throughout my process has been about 15 points. Depends on how much I adjust that, right? But if I go ahead and grab the pen tool and I make myself a point here and I give it stroke of 15 points, a point doesn't have any weight, but a line can. So I can give myself a nice reference here just by giving myself a chunk of line, right? So now I've got a 15-point line just sitting there. And my 15-point line is probably going to make this into a rectangle for ease of use. Edit. Oh, sorry, object, path, outline, stroke. Now I've got a little rectangle here. And I'll put this on the baseline. Now, if you remember from optical corrections, I don't actually want this on the baseline, my circle for my period, because a circle will look smaller than a square, right? So if I drag this to be exactly at the baseline from the top of my rectangle, when I place these next to each other, the circle just visually looks smaller. So that's a problem. So I could actually just programmatically transform this. I could go Object, Transform, Scale, and I could say, oh, I want to add like maybe 3%, right? Or let's say 6%, so 3 on each, top and bottom, or left, right? So if I go 106% of what it is, that scales it up just a little bit, and now I have a circle that looks visually a little bit more similar in size to the rectangle next to it. So now I have a decent size, and I'm just going to grab my period here and put it overshooting the baseline by a little bit. You can set guides for yourself for how much you want to overshoot, or you can go and compare this to like the overshoots of the S. But I don't find that overshoots are always best used when they're uniform. Like the S might need to overshoot a little bit more just because of its form, and the period maybe a little bit less just because of its lack of weight. You get to decide. So that is one case where consistency maybe is not what you need. So here's a period. I just designed a character. Boom. It took me 2 minutes. Draw a circle, right? But of course I need to draw a space box for this period. So I'm going to bring the S back and grab its rectangle. That's rectangle, copy it, paste it in front, put it on the period layer here, and lock and hide my S layer again. And then with this rectangle, a period it's probably going to need a space box that is centered pretty well. So I'm just going to go ahead and center the period here. And you may need to test this a little bit. You probably don't want anything that's going to clash here, but a period will probably need to be tucked in pretty close to your other letters. So I'm going to give it only a very little bit of extra space on each left and right. Because any given letter will also have some space here too, right? So a period, since it's such a small character that lacks weight, it's going to tuck in underneath letters a little bit better if we just give it less space. So here's a period. Great. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy everything on this layer and give myself a new layer and just paste it in. Paste it in. Come on. There we go. Okay, and I've got the period, so I'm going to lock that layer, and I'm going to hide that layer. And then it's pretty easy to go about turning a period into a colon, as you might guess. All you have to do is grab another period and bring it up here to a reasonable height, which if you're looking at your x height, probably going to be just a little bit below your x height because you want it to be lower than a lowercase letter, maybe, yeah, or even close to. You could even touch the x height. You can adjust this, put it next to some other letters, and see what you get. I'm actually going to just bump this down a little bit. I think it's probably going to look okay about there. And now I've got a semicolon, no problem. So I got a period and a semicolon, and then we're going to do a comma and a quote. I'm going to go ahead and save out this layer. You'll notice that I didn't save anything in a non-destructive fashion for this because it's just a circle. It's very easy to just make another one or edit the circle. So you do you as far as saving the pieces that you're actually going to need. I'm going to save and lock that. But first, I'm going to copy one of these circles. I'm going to copy the bottom one here and paste it in, and I'll create a new layer for my comma and move that up into the correct layer. And I'm going to lock and hide the period layer. Well, I still need a space box as well, so I'm going to grab that as well. Why not? All right, seems good. All right, so now I'm going to lock and hide that period layer, and I've got another period layer, yay. So a comma, you can design a comma in many different forms. You can make a little wedge out of it. You could add a little tail to it so that it feels kind of like a curly quote. I'm going to do something kind of in between here. So I'm just going to use the pen tool, and I'm going to get up close and personal with this thing and just add somewhat of a little hook or wedge on this thing. Even though it's just a circle, I'm going to treat it like it's a clockwise endeavor and create a new path coming off the right side of it here that drags straight down, constrained, and this is going to extend below the line, and I do want a little bit of this curve, but I don't want curve coming out because I just want a nice flat line across the bottom. And I don't need a 90 or anything here. I just want a reasonable angle. And then actually when I create this, I'm going to hold Alt after I've clicked and then drag up at a similar angle to how I came in, but not quite. And then I'm going to add a little bit of curve. Just move into the shape somewhere in there, it doesn't matter where. I'm going to merge these anyway, and then I'm going to click to connect them and switch this to black. Black stroke. Now black fill. Good. No stroke, black fill. So now it looks kind of like a comma. There's something not quite right here. This feels a little too flat all of a sudden. It's almost like we didn't make it out of the body of the period here. So I'm going to actually come back in and add a little bit more bulge or curve to that, just so it feels a little more normal. Yeah, that feels better to me. So there's my comma, and it's going to hang below the baseline. That's just a traditional standard way of handling a comma. And yeah, so it's two separate shapes right now, right? And they're just shapes. There's no spine to these because they're kind of custom shapes, a circle and this little wedge. So those are my type DNA pieces for this comma. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to select them, copy, paste them, and just be non-destructive about it. I don't think it'll cause a problem, but before I merge these, I want to do that so that if I ever want to edit it, I have the separate shapes. And then once I have these other two shapes that are not locked in, that are showing, I'm going to just go Object, Path, Outline Stroke. Oh, sorry, not Outline Stroke. I'm going to go over to my Pathfinder palette. That's what I need. And just merge the shapes. And now I have a comma. Cool. And you can see how very easily, if you combined this comma with, say, the semicolon layer, or the colon layer, you now have a semicolon. Like, it's not that hard. This is not rocket science, right? You're just building these things and throwing them together. So, yeah. So now I've got a comma, and that's all I need here. So the next one that I want to make is a quote, and lo and behold, this comma form works really well as a quote. You could modify it. There are lots of different types of quotes. You could do straight quotes. You could do slanted quotes. You could do curly quotes, single and double. In fact, you'll need to do both single and double quotes for your assignment. So I'm going to select all of the DNA pieces as well, because I actually want those in case I were to go and edit. In case I were to go and edit my quotes, I'm going to want the DNA pieces as well. So I've got those three. I'm going to paste them in front, give myself a new layer, grab all three of these, put them in a new layer. Now I can go back and lock up things in my comma layer, right, and hide the pieces I don't need. Oh, I have this hidden, the space box for the comma, but it's spaced just about like a period. You could go in and finesse that if you want. I'm just going to keep the same spacing for now. So I'm going to go ahead and hide and lock layer 7, the comma layer, and then on layer 8, I have all of my DNA pieces. I'm going to move them all together so that they're all stacked nicely, and I need to make a guess as to exactly how high up this quote needs to be. I'm going to let it overshoot over the ascender a little bit. It feels right. You can go in and compare into other fonts and see exactly where this spacing should happen. But a quote usually could, well, I mean, it could be a single quote, it could be a double quote. You're going to need to do both, and it's as simple as duplicating these. But I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste those pieces, and then I'm going to move another one out to the side here and kind of tuck them up next to each other. So now we have a double quote going on. And of course that means that we're going to need to grab the spacing rectangle again. Come on. Come on. Showing unlocked. There we go. And I need to put a spacing rectangle in. Oh, I did not copy it. Here we go. Spacing rectangle needs to go in here, and then I can lock and hide it. Actually, that doesn't need to be specifically hidden. Just the layer will hide it, right? Lock it, hide it. There. Now we're back to our double quote layer, and I have a spacing box to work with, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag this out to what seems reasonable here. You could go as far as centering this up on these two, and you can use the alignment tools to do some centering, group and center and things like that. I've got a little extra space on the right here, it looks like, so I'm just going to give myself a little less, make it feel right. So there's a double quote. You may actually run into cases where things like quotes and certain punctuation marks may need to actually have less space allotted to them than their figures take up, because it's very unlikely that a quote or an apostrophe, for example, is going to hit other letters, except for maybe certain ascenders. So if you can compare it to those ascenders that it might have offending clashes with, you can then tighten its space box so that those things, punctuation marks actually sit in a more natural place instead of taking up a full chunk of space down here in your text. Right now I'm just going to leave it full and open since I don't really have a lot of letters to test against. I'll come back in and do a testing round of spacing. But that's how you would design several of these punctuation marks, right? You've got double quotes, or a comma, or a colon, or period. And you can use those same pieces of DNA and copy and paste them. It's maybe a good idea to take those DNA pieces and save them elsewhere. I'm saving them each individually in their own layers as extra pieces, right? Underneath, well, extra pieces underneath what you're actually working with. But you can save them out in your own palette of all your type DNA pieces and label them and organize them, whatever you want, so that it's all nice and usable for you later. So yeah, there are some punctuation pieces. I hope that was helpful.